Okay, this will be familiar to some of you. We're about to visit our good friend Mikl Brawner at Harlequin Nursery. And we're in for a real treat here. Yes, indeed. Oh, look. All sorts of people here. And there's Mikl.
You know, here's our little dump truck, and
Whoa. Yeah, man, you got to start with the soil. Yes, sir.
I'll let the guys unload that by hand.
Why don't you welcome us to Harlequin?
Okay. Welcome to Harlequin's Gardens, Sustainable Nursery. We've been here for 29 years, down at the end of this dead-end road with hardly any water. All the water that we use to water our trees and our plants come in a truck. So we have learned to be very water conserving. I was really into water conservation in the first place, which has allowed me to think that you could possibly run a nursery without a good supply of water, because I was in the Peace Corps in water wells and water development. So it was kind of natural for us to think in terms of saving water and not using a lot of water and growing plants that don't need a lot of water. So the soils that we sell here at Harlequin's Gardens are locally accessed. So we're not bringing them in. There's a couple from California, but almost everything else is
Locally sourced.
made in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't sell chemical fertilizers because chemical fertilizers are made from petroleum, from natural gas, and we don't believe that natural gas is what we should be feeding plants, and there are all kinds of big problems with using chemical fertilizers. Just one thing is that in the manufacture of chemical fertilizers, nitrous oxide is one of the byproducts, and it is something like 200 times more intense on the atmosphere than carbon dioxide.
Wow.
And more of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And the other thing is that when you use chemical fertilizers, that nitrous oxide is one of the things that off-gasses. The other thing is that chemical fertilizers don't have micronutrients, which are very important for plants to build their immune systems from. So you wind up getting big plants that are weak. And that's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do here. We want to have strong plants that can defend themselves. So that's what the products that we bring in here are largely a different concept about fertility. They're really more about feeding the microorganisms with the belief that microorganisms are really where fertility comes from, not from petroleum. And
Yeah, this is your native garden.
that's a native manzanita, and this is a native currant that hasn't leafed out yet this spring. And this is an agave that's not native to Colorado, but it's adapted to Colorado.
Long-lived. 100-year plant, right?
Yeah, well, the last time I grew agave, it took 13 years for it to bloom, and it got 13 feet high, and it bloomed with a 2-foot high flowering stalk, and it attracted all kinds of nectar-loving birds.
Wow.
And bees and all kinds of things. and then it died.
Yeah.
Because that's what it
Impermanence.
does. That's what it does.
Okay, I'm rolling.
So we've been specializing in native plants since the beginning of Harlequin's Gardens 29 years ago. And a part of the reason for that is because native plants are adapted here and have developed here along with the native soils and native climate. And so they don't require as much fertilizer, pest management, water, care, although care is always good. But they also support our local bees and native bees, as well as the honeybees. They support butterflies. They have berries for local birds. And they're beautiful, and they have a different kind of look than an East Coast plant. And so right now, this is early spring. Things aren't even leafed out much yet, but so it's not looking as beautiful as it will in a month or 2 months. But these are plants that you put them in the ground and they will survive. They'll grow. And whereas 29 years ago, when we first started selling natives, they weren't very popular. People thought, oh, those scraggly things that we've seen up in the foothills, we don't really want that. Now everybody has realized how important natives are and how well adapted they are and how easy and successful they are. So now we have a hard time even keeping natives.
Oh, that's great.
So this is the first garden that we built here at Harlequin's Gardens 30 years ago. I built it as a xeriscape garden, and it has never been watered more than 7 times a year, and most often 5 or 6 times a year. And so that means certain plants can't live here. They won't make it. It means that over the years I've lost some plants, but these plants have survived, and right now, of course, this is almost April Fool's Day, and so everything is still relatively dormant, but you can see that it doesn't look like it's not completely bare. Some things are already evergreen, and some things are coming up already and ready to start flowering before too long. And it's been a very successful garden, and at this point, it's sort of naturalized. I don't put a lot of time into it. I do weed and do a little bit of putting compost on in the fall, but really this garden is somewhat naturalized and can handle Colorado conditions, and that's how it was designed to work.
Okay, let's talk about trough gardens.
So the rock garden people have pioneered the use of troughs, and troughs are sort of an old form. Used to be the English used these old stone sinks, but now we make these troughs with hypertufa, which is a cement with perlite and sphagnum peat and a couple of other things and cement. And the good thing about them is that they breathe. So it means that you can put in plants that might not do well under other circumstances, and they'll do great in troughs. So a lot of rock garden plants, a lot of small plants are shown off in a trough. This trough of mine is a good trough, but I haven't kept up with the planting of it very well. My wife's trough gardens are really showy, and I wish you could see those.
Okay. Okay.
So this is the beginning of our insectary garden. We planted it a year ago, and a lot of the plants are still young, and some of them didn't make it. We're going to be replanting. But the purpose of this garden is to feed insects. And not just any insects, but insects which help to manage other insects. So there are a lot of them are also pollinator plants, but in fact a lot of them have little tiny flowers which attract little tiny wasps and little tiny bees, which then either eat or parasitize pests. So we have our nursery over on this side, and then we have our wholesale nursery on this side, and the insectary garden is going to help take care of insect pests on both sides. So rather than spraying pesticides, which we will never do, we are letting the insects take care of the insect pests. So the idea of having an insectary garden is partly that the insects, you're not trying to eradicate all the pests. In fact, if you have an infestation and we have to spray, which occasionally we will spray something like a horticultural oil or possibly neem, but we never spray anything that's poisonous. And we do not intend to try to kill all the pests. Why? Because if you kill all the pests, then you're not leaving any food for the beneficial insects. You want to actually attract the beneficial insects to the garden and let them take care of the pests. So, for example, in this garden, I let certain plants grow like salsify and yucca that attract aphids. So I have aphids in the garden, and then do I try to kill those aphids? No, I leave the aphids because that provides food for the lacewings and ladybugs and syrphid flies that then are attracted to the garden. And if they come and they find all this food, then they know this is a good place to live, and they will lay their eggs in my garden so that when I have a pest in the future, they're already here. So this is one of our composting situations. We also do composting underneath our nursery benches, and we use this compost in making our own potting mix. Very few nurseries bother or go to all the trouble of making their own mixes, but we do because we like to know what's in our mixes. And we do a lot of propagation ourselves. We grow things from seeds, from cuttings, from starts, and we like to use our own potting mix because a lot of the commercial potting mixes are just made with perlite, sphagnum peat, and vermiculite, and then it's actually designed to be used with chemical fertilizers. So since we don't use chemical fertilizers, we want to start with a medium that's actually nutritive. So a compost brings in a lot of biology, and then we put in some other nutrients that the plants can take from the soil itself.
Hang on a second, let me get out of the way. You always look ridiculous in their sun hats, including a mask now.
Okay, I'm coming back your way, Michael.
So we grow a lot of our plants ourselves. This is our wholesale operation, which we started so that we didn't have to buy plants that had been treated with neonicotinoids from other sources. So here we know what has gone into our plants, and we know that none of them have been sprayed with neonicotinoids or any toxic chemical. So they're growing out here with the wind and the sun, and in our homemade soil mixes, and also we're starting to try some other soil mix from the Paonia Soil Company, which is relatively local. And the idea here is that we're growing plants that are strong and healthy, that have not been grown up on chemicals, and when you put them into your garden, they know what to do. They recognize soil because we've had composting in our mixes, and there's a lot of microorganisms in our mixes, and we actually add mycorrhizae to our mixes so that the plants themselves are really well supported and strong and healthy. And healthy plants need very little pest management. We spend probably 5 or 10 times more on our soils than most nurseries, and practically nothing do we spend on pest management.
Okay.
One of the plants that we're happy about promoting this year is this teucrium. It's a germander that I found in as a single seedling among a bunch of green teucriums, and this one was very silvery, and we planted it out, and it can get 2.5 feet in diameter, and it holds that silver color in the winter. And it has a sort of a light purple flower that looks great against the silver. Anyway, this plant is very drought tolerant and a great plant for Colorado. This is going to be a plant select plant. It's chosen by the Plant Select program to demonstrate and promote plants that are not well known and that are very successful in Colorado.
Haven't visited, and I can't imagine there are that many.
There are a lot of people who've never visited. See, there's our Harlequin's Gardens poster.
Yes. A lot of seed.
And
A
these
lot
are
of seed.
All from local sources.
Wow.
I started off in the plant world as an arborist, and in the wintertime when I wasn't able to climb trees, I researched alternatives to pesticide. I had a little apple orchard in Iowa before I moved to Colorado, and I realized at that point that I was not interested in trying to grow plants with pesticides, and so there wasn't a lot to know about them back in those days, so I started researching it. And back in those days, you didn't go to the web. You wrote letters to various universities and people who were in the business who were actually growing without pesticides and asked them questions. And so after doing 15 years of research, I started selecting products that would function to grow plants organically. And so now at our nursery, we have all of these products, and none of them are poisons. They work in various ways to sometimes kill the insects, sometimes just distract them, or irritate them, or confuse them. But we don't try to kill all of them at all. We leave plenty of the insect pests for food for the beneficials.